Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live webinar on the best practices in large UI test automation projects using Ranorex. Hope everyone's having a great week on this Wednesday, July 29th. My name is Jason Branham, and I'm honored to be your presenter for today. Looks like we still got quite a few people filing in here. If you don't mind, I'll briefly wait, maybe just another 20 seconds or so, just to make sure that we get everyone a chance to join up here today. So stand by one more moment here, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, looks like a lot of people are filing in now. So also in the meantime, if you don't mind, I will briefly ask you in the audience, if you could, please look at your go-to webinar control panel. You'll see a questions panel there. If you could briefly provide me some feedback, just letting me know that, yes, you're able to hear me correctly. And yep, already getting some feedback there. Hopefully you're also able to see this slideshow. Definitely let me know if that's not the case. This questions panel, by the way, is being monitored by two other Ranorex engineers. So Josh Owen and Mubin Kadiwala are in there to take any questions that you might have during the webinar. So feel free to utilize this questions panel to ask away. They'll try to answer your questions right away. And at the end of this webinar, we'll also have a Q&A section where I can go over some of the top questions we see there and address those directly. All right, great. Some good, oops, a couple people having some audio issues. Do check your audio panel there on the control panel as well. You might have to reconfigure that. Pick your a different speaker perhaps. But it looks like for the most part, everyone can hear well. There's a great question there already, by the way, about is this webinar being recorded? As you can see here at the bottom of this slide, yes, we will record this webinar, and you'll receive a follow-up email which includes a link to download this roughly 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. Also, for those who couldn't make it, they'll also receive that recording. So let's quickly go through the agenda here. I don't have a whole lot of slides. If any of you have worked with me before, I noticed some names that I recognize. Again, my name is Jason Branham. I'm a senior engineer here at Ranorex, and mostly working with the evaluation phase of the product, so newcomers to Ranorex. I've probably worked with a lot of you. As you know, I'm not big on slides. I'm not really a theory guy. I'm more about practice. So we have a couple slides to introduce different topics, but for the most part, I'm going to be showing you the product. We'll be in a live demonstration mode, as it were. But just so we have a formal agenda here, we'll start off with an introduction, what kind of topics we're going to cover here today, and get right into the live demo. Few more joining in, and looks like everyone is good. Still a few people on audio there. Please check that audio panel. Everything looks good on my end though, so hopefully not the case for too many people. All right, let's begin, shall we? So a shorter webinar today. Normally we do about an hour for webinars, but we're starting an initiative to have more targeted webinars, right? So kind of smaller, more specific topics. This webinar in particular is about best practices when it comes to large UI, large UIs, whether they be desktop, web, or mobile. And implementation-wise, it's quite basic actually. So there's not going to be anything too, highly technical here. Maybe just some things you didn't know about, right? So that's the main goal today. So as mentioned, it'll be approximately 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer depending on the questions. 30 minutes of that will be demonstration, and we'll save at least 15 minutes for questions at the end. Definitely also check out on our website, the user guide is available. It's a good place to also learn some of this content that we'll be going over, or review it maybe. Before we actually officially get started with the live demonstration, I would just ask if you in the audience can answer just a couple of quick questions for me. These are these questions are for us to make sure that we're targeting the right audience, the right persona. So if you would bear with me here, I'm going to quickly show you a question on your screen. Go ahead and click the appropriate answer. First thing I'd like to know is, what is your experience with Ranorex? Are you a newcomer? Have you been using the product for a while? I'll wait a few moments to give everyone a chance to answer. Go ahead and just click directly onto your screen. And once we get a good percentage of people responding, we'll launch the next question. All right, we're right about 85% of responses. Let's see if we can't get a few more there. All right, 90%, that's an A, that's good for me. Let me close this panel for now, and I'll share with you the results. So as you can see, pretty good mix. A lot of newcomers, which is great. These best practice webinars in particular are good to take a look at early. But we also see a fair amount of people who've actually had the tool for quite a while. So I think even you will get something out of this, hopefully. Real quick, another question, if you don't mind. We will ask you, what is your role in the organization? So your official title, are you more of a developer, test automation engineer, or perhaps you're on the management side? If they don't apply, of course, pick the other, and maybe feel free to let us know in the chat window there, the questions panel rather. And we're polling at about 85% again, so I'll give it another second or two, and then we'll close the polling. Also seeing some responses in chat there. There again, looks like a pretty good mix. Some developers, some testers, with the majority being test automation engineer, which, kind of a mix between those two, right? So excellent. Thank you so much for providing us with that information. Again, we'll use this to, curtail our webinars or shape them so that they fit the right audience going forward. Alrighty, so let's get started with the bulk of our content here. And as mentioned, it's going to be very hands-on. So I'm going to get right into the live demonstration. Before I do that, real quick though, just to show you what's our main goal, or what are some of these best practices we're going to go over today. Probably the most important topic, I think, when we talk about large UIs is organizing your Ranorex object repository. So for the newcomers, you might be like, what is that exactly? So don't worry, I'll describe this vocabulary in more detail, obviously. And kind of fitting exactly with that same subject is using good naming conventions. So this is, especially if you're working in teams, having an object repository that's well organized, but also objects in there that are well named, makes it very easy for everyone to basically know what that object is really referring to. And finally, we'll talk about focusing on a test flow that really emphasizes reusability. So objects are definitely the most important, but actions are as well. As you know, basically that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. With an object-based tool like Ranorex, we need to first capture your UI elements, your objects, but of course actions are very important as well, what we do with those objects, right? As mentioned, kind of a shorter one, but let's get through with these 3 points. And I'm going to create a test completely from scratch. It'll be a smaller one, but a large UI to work with. And we'll get right into it here. So let me go ahead and launch Ranorex Studio. For some of you newcomers, we do have a completely fully functioning free trial available on our website. It is fully functional, so everything I show you today is going to be doable in that free trial version as well. Let's launch Ranorex Studio, which is where you're actually going to be creating your project. Now, a couple of things to point out here on what we call the start page. There are some good resources available to you here, such as some sample solutions. Ranorex is a product which can basically work with any type of UI out there, whether it's desktop, web, or mobile. And because of that, you can also do some interesting end-to-end type of scenarios, right? Some cross-platform examples. So check out those sample solutions to see what a medium-sized test would end up resembling for each of the three different technology types there. Also keep an eye on the news feed in the middle here, keeping you up to date with things like white papers, new webinars that are coming out, and so on. If you're not a fan of the live webinars, or maybe they don't fall in a good time for you, certainly definitely also check out this Getting Started panel, which will take you to our YouTube channel where you can watch at your own leisure. What I'm going to do is create a brand new solution in Ranorex. So in Ranorex, we call the test automation you're creating, we call that a solution. And if you're a bit familiar with the product, you can go straight for this new blank solution option. But since most of you in the audience are newcomers, let's go via the wizard here, which just holds your hand a little bit in the beginning. So I'll choose new solution via wizard. Now for this demonstration, I have chosen a web application, but certainly the best practices here apply exactly the same to a desktop or mobile application as well. And the website I'll be using is basically just a sample e-commerce website. So we're going to do a quick recording, just basically adding an item to our cart, nothing too fancy. Again, the focus is going to be on organizing our test here in such a way that it's very easy to understand and look at. So just to give you a quick preview of our application here, I'm going to also grab this URL because I'm going to need it later. Just copy paste that, or copy it to my clipboard there. And let's go ahead and close the browser for now. So I will choose web here. This first dialog is really just about where you want to start. As mentioned, you can go across technologies. So you can have a test that starts in web and then does some desktop stuff and even does some mobile stuff, all in the very same solution. This is basically just what are we going to look at first. So let's choose web. And I have to give it a name here. So my solution name, let's just call it, large UI webinar for lack of imagination. And we'll hit continue. Okay, so here's where I'll utilize that URL that I just copied to my clipboard because I need to point it to the right website. And because I'm going to use the recording functionality, I just need to pick which browser do I want to record in. When it comes to web, every test you create is cross-browser compatible. So you can create it in any browser you like and then run it back in any browser you like. So choice here is totally up to preference. I guess, to make things interesting, let's go with the buggiest of the choices there with IE. And we will go ahead and have Ranorex launch that browser for me automatically since I don't already have it running. And hit continue. Last little option here is called whitelisting. So basically the idea here is, do I want Ranorex to only focus on my website, or do I want it to basically be able to see any type of UI I put in front of it? This is just to put a laser focus on particular applications or one application. Just in case we get any questions in the questions panel there that might relate to desktop or mobile even, I'm going to choose to not use whitelisting. And again, that allows Ranorex to basically see anything as opposed to just a particular set of applications. You can always change that behavior later, so it really doesn't matter what we pick here, honestly. So I'll choose do not use and continue. Last but not least, it just lets me know, hey, there's a user guide online. You should probably check it out. And it's also letting me know there'll be a tutorial panel that opens up as soon as I finish here. So I'll click finish and we'll see that Ranorex launches the IE browser and takes me to that URL I specified. Well, very quickly. I see that I already have an object in my cart there. I'm going to go ahead and clean that out real fast before we begin. Wasn't supposed to be part of the demonstration there, but that is a best practice, of course. You always want to start fresh and kind of clean things up afterwards. Looking back at Ranorex, we see a couple of different views are open here. As mentioned, that tutorial panel is off to my right. It's nice when you're off on your own, kind of just walks you through the steps here. Since I'm going to show you all that anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close that panel. Could be a bit distracting. And the main view that we're looking at in the middle here is an important one. Again, because there's a lot of newcomers, I'll just describe a couple bits of vocabulary here before we actually get started. We call this our test suite view, which is where you'll control the flow of your test. So we have what's called a test suite. You can think of it just like a folder. And each test suite can contain one or many test cases, which you can kind of think of as a subfolder, as you see there, the indentation. And each test case is comprised of what we call modules. So we have an open browser module, we have a recording one, and then we have a closed browser module. You can think of these like keywords, right? They describe what the actions inside will be doing. So you can see we already have open and close. We need to fill in the meat here. Before I actually get into recording, just a couple more vocabulary terms to point out. Off to the left here is a project explorer view. And the typical hierarchy we see here is that when I create a solution, that's my top level item here, solution. You'll see that it contains one project inside of it. You can actually have multiple, but in general, there's no need to. Really no benefit to having multiple projects in one solution. And each solution contains one test suite by default. You can create multiple of those as well. Let's stick to one to one to one. And it also has one object repository. And that, in particular, I do want to point out, is good to maintain just one. Okay, so the object repository is a kind of global thing. So we want all these different modules, all these different actions we're going to create are going to be targeting the same object repository. The reason we keep it one is that we want to be able to, if we need to do any kind of maintenance or anything like that, we want to be able to look at one place to do that. So I'll talk more about it, of course, once we get something in there. And the easiest way to get something into our object repository is to simply record our test. So let's jump into this recording one. Again, right now it doesn't do anything. The way we'll jump in there is simply by double clicking it anywhere we see it. So I could double click it here, here, or here. Once I'm into that recording module, we have two parts of each module. One we call the action table up above here, and the other view is that object repository. So there's the file for it, and here's the view for it. Again, that's a global thing, so no matter what recording module I'm in, I'm going to be looking at the same set of objects here. Now, not much to talk about right now, right? Because there's nothing here. So let's get something in there by clicking on my record button up here at the top to put me in recording mode. Now, just a general best practice here while recording is to take your time. I can't stress that enough. A lot of the issues we see with new users is that they try to record quickly, thinking that, somehow that's going to make their tests run faster. That's not the case. In fact, trying to do this too quickly can actually backfire, and you might get some actions that you don't really need or accidentally create, let's say, which then requires me to do some cleanup, right? So definitely take your time while recording, be very deliberate. That is definitely a universal best practice, no matter what you're recording against. And let's do a couple things here. So I'm going to search for a product. I want to make sure I get my mouse just over that search field there, and especially look for that red border. That's going to let me know that Ranorex sees that individual UI element or object. So I want to make sure that red border is around whatever it is I'm about to interact with. And let's give this search field a click. So that'll be my first action. Now I just need to search for something. Got a couple t-shirts down there, kind of pricey t-shirts, but nonetheless, let's search for maybe the Chuck Norris one, which is called FUBAR. So I'll type in foobar, and hit enter on my keyboard. Now there is no search button. Normally there's like a magnifying glass, which is another way I could have done that, but in this case I don't have that option. I just hit enter. All right, so now we're singled out on our product, and notice this was a page transition, right? So I want to keep that in mind, that as I'm going through these different views, these different page transitions, I want to kind of just make a mental note, right? That, okay, this is a new page. We'll see why here in a second. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to add this to my cart. So make sure to click on that button there. Now here I have an option, right? And this is another important best practice. I have kind of two ways I could navigate to my cart now. I could either click on this view cart button, but a better idea for me would be to take advantage of these kind of universal navigations up here. Particularly on websites, this makes things really easy to get around my app. And this is going to kind of be a factor when it comes to reusability. I don't want to rely on something that maybe pops up or maybe doesn't pop up, right? If I can have a very stable way of getting somewhere, like this navigation bar, then that's what I want to go with. Now, as you notice, I'm not getting that red border, okay? And sometimes that can happen. Either you want to, unfocus on your app and focus back on it to make sure it comes back up. But again, one thing you definitely don't want to do is click without seeing that red border. So now I see it again. Let's maybe even navigate home first and then to cart. So I'll click on home. I'll then click on cart. I should always be able to use these navigations whenever I want. So very reusable. Now, since we're in here, might as well do some testing, right? Let's maybe check that, we got a total here, even here. And maybe we check that we have one item in the kind of cart view up here. So I'm going to create what's called a validation. Other software call them assertions or checkpoints. RandomX, we call them validations. So to do that, I'm going to click on this validate button on my toolbar and just pick the UI element that I'm interested in checking. So let's go for this total down here, perhaps. I want to make sure that's the right number. So if I give that a click in validation mode, a little menu pops up. Looks a little scary at first, but basically what we're looking at, right, is the HTML structure of this application. And all we really care about is, did we get the right object? So you can usually tell by the screenshot there, yep, that looks good. So we'll hit next. Now we're going to decide what is it we want to check about this object, right? So depending on my requirements, my testing requirements, maybe I'm checking some kind of state dependent thing, like it should be enabled, it should have focus. Maybe I'm checking kind of a style type thing, like the font or the size. In this case, we're actually interested in the value, which looks to be held in the inner text property. So I'm going to make sure to check that inner text checkbox there and click OK to create that validation point. We'll do one more while we're here. Why not? On the one item there, should be one item, not 0 or 2. So again, I'll hit validate, do it a little bit quicker this time. Target that item. Confirm I got the right object. Hit next. And again, it's looking like the inner text attribute has the info I need, which is, I would say 90% of the cases on web, that's going to be your attribute if you're checking for value. Click OK. All right, so let's do some form filling, right? We're gonna check out, which should also empty my cart for me. So two birds with one stone, as they say. Again, I could, I'm sure there's some button on here that I could check out, if I scroll down, but I have a checkout tab on my navigation. Let's do that instead. That's, again, more repeatable. So I'll click on checkout here. And let's start filling out these fields. Now notice I already have the focus in my first name field, but I don't want to just start typing. Okay, that is another kind of hard habit to break, especially if you're coming from a manual testing perspective where you're trying to do everything as quickly as possible. Always make sure with your input fields, especially, that you click, even if you have the focus, just to capture that. All right, what are some things that can go wrong? If you don't, well, maybe the focus isn't there always, right? Maybe in a week they update the app and suddenly focus starts somewhere else. So don't rely on things like focus and tab order. Those things can definitely change. Whereas if you click an object, you will capture that object and therefore target that specific object on playback. So I'll click in first name field, type in my first name. I'll do the same for last name. Click, type it in. Now I need to scroll. Cool thing about Ranorex, you don't actually have to record scrolling actions. Ranorex will always automatically scroll your application as necessary. So here I can actually pause my recording so that I don't capture my scrolling, and then manually scroll the page just so that I get all these fields in view. So I could have recorded that, of course, but it's an unnecessary action that I could have deleted later, so might as well not record it. We'll hit continue again and start continuing on these fields. Start with company name. That's an easy one. Now there are some existing stuff in here, right? There's some pre-existing values. And one thing you can definitely do is use smart actions. We'll have another webinar on that here shortly. But for the moment, I'm going to assume, right, that maybe I clear the cache or clear cookies before I start my test. So even though these fields are prior filled out right now, I'm actually going to clear them out. So again, that's not something I want to be part of my test. So I will pause for that. You know, another option would be that I could probably gotten away with a double click. Let's go ahead and just kind of manually go through here and clear these out. You can see there's some weird values there. Let's even clear out the, well, the state doesn't really matter, I guess. But yeah, make sure that your app is kind of in a blank slate state, if you want to call it that, and then continue. Probably should have done that before I recorded, but these things happen when you're live. Let's fill out a street address here. Easy street. We'll fill out a city. I'm located in Tampa. We'll pick a state. We'll fill out our zip code here. Actually needs to be 84. We'll fill out our phone number. And finally, our email address, which is actually my email address if you ever want to get in contact with me. And we'll place the order. Okay, so that should, again, reset my cart. So maybe I do a quick validation that I went down to 0 items, and maybe also validate that the order received message came up. Let's start with the 0 items. Hit next. Check in intertext again. Okay, and lastly, we'll validate order received. Now, it just so happened I was able to get through my whole scenario there. However, even if you're going for a longer scenario, right, I do recommend not going really much above 30 actions or so before you kind of come back and check your work. Okay, even if I have many more steps to do, 30 is a good number to kind of stop and review what you've done in case anything's wrong, right? And if there's something I need to fix or look at, it's a lot easier when I'm only looking at 30 as opposed to 300 actions, let's say. So I will stop my recording here. And let's take a look at what we got. Now this is where the object repository best practices comes in. So I could step through these actions, but really my main concern at the moment is what I have in my repository. So if you see, by default, kind of everything's flat, right? Now everything is, technically underneath my top level item here, which is called application under test, which is my website. So I can tell just by looking at it that basically all these different objects belong to my website, right? If I were to record against some other type of application, let's just do it real quick, then I would have a separate top level item. So just to show you that that kind of happens automatically, I'll have a little desktop app here. I'll record, maybe click some object on it and stop, just to show you that it gets its own top level item, right? So there is some automatic organization that happens just basically based on the app. But that's just the bare bones, right? That's not much more than that. So I will do some additional organization, and the approach I want to take here is, any of you who've actually used Selenium or many other open source products have probably heard this term, but a page object model. Right, so let me go ahead and clean up that final action there. I don't need it anymore. And the best way to do this, again, if you do too many actions, this becomes a little bit more difficult, but since I only have 30 to work with here, I'm going to kind of step through my actions and say, okay, what page was I on when I did this? All right, so I'm making mental notes while I'm recording. First things first, input tag S, right away, that's not a good name, right? I mentioned we're going to talk about naming conventions. Let's give it a more meaningful name. That was our search field, right? So let's go ahead and right away in the repository, if you highlight an action, you also highlight its corresponding object down below. And you can come down here and you can name these whatever you want. It's totally up to you, but obviously you want to make them meaningful. So search field, why not? Now, automatically, it's a lot easier to understand what's happening after doing that. So sometimes the names that come out of the box are pretty good. Sometimes it's better to go in there and, give them a better name. Well, my searching here, my search field, that happened all on my main page. Okay, so these three actions are all happening on the main page. So I know search field belongs in a folder we can call main page. So how do we create such a folder? In your object repository, if you right click on the top level item, by right clicking, you could see add new item here. And the type of folder we're going to create is a simple folder. I'll talk about the other option there here shortly, but a simple folder is just basically there for organization. There's no special functionality to it. It's just there to group items together. And there's really no limitation. So you can have a simple folder, you can have a subfolder, to infinity basically. So you can organize things however you want really. But I definitely recommend taking that page object model approach. So let's create a simple folder and we'll call it, the main page folder. Okay, and just for clarity's sake, I'm going to drag it up to the top here. That's another thing, just like renaming, moving objects around is totally safe. So you can rename any object and you can move any object, including these folders, without hurting anything. So I'll bring my folder to the top there and I'm going to grab search field and simply drag and drop it into that folder. Okay, so now it's underneath that folder. So what's the benefit of this? The main benefit is that I have a search functionality of my repository. So on the repository toolbar here, you'll see this little search field. And that can very easily get me to a particular folder. It can also work for objects as well. But you can imagine as this repository grows and grows, right? Maybe I get like 2,000, 3,000. I've seen repositories that go up to, 10,000 objects. The more organized I am, the easier it's going to be to find any particular object. So I recommend doing this type of, sorting and foldering early and often as your project goes along. Let's continue with a few more here. Add to cart, well, that was after we searched, so we're kind of actually on the product page now. So let's go ahead and create a folder for product page as well. So again, right click the top level item, simple folder, product page will be the name. And again, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to drag it up to the top here. And my add to cart button is going to be part of that. Okay, so actually this created a rooted folder. So we see all this, the price, the order received message, all that stuff that we can consider, part of the main product view, I guess, was automatically sorted into this, what we call a rooted folder. Rooted folders will be created automatically by Ranorex if you happen to click 3 items or more that all belong to a certain subsection of your application. So you will see automatic foldering that happens. The difference between a simple folder and a rooted folder is that a rooted folder actually contains that portion of path that those 3 or more objects shared. Right, so it's a thing of inheritance. If we look at add to cart, for instance, and we right click and look at its properties, we'll get the properties panel up here. Must be hidden over here. Oh, there it goes. Just being slow today. The actual path that Ranorex is going to use, the object path, is this whole what we call absolute path. You can see this is basically a combination of this object path that we see off to the right of the object, so add to cart, plus any ancestor object, so any parent, any grandparent, and you can tell that by the indentation. You'll see this a lot in Ranorex. This indentation basically lets us know that there's a relationship here between add to cart and main. And that is a parent to child relationship, right? Add to cart is the child of main. So as a child, it inherits certain things. And one of those things is the rooted folders portion of path there. Now, if you're like me, I'm a bit of a control freak, so I'm not big on the rooted folders that get created automatically, actually. I'd rather organize things the way I want to organize them. So I actually have a setting that I changed for this webinar to have Ranorex not create these folders automatically. And to show you what that setting is, I'll pop into settings here. It's in your repository defaults, this enable folder auto generation. If you have that unchecked, Ranorex will not be creating these rooted folders for you. So personal preference again on that one. Again, I like to be pretty picky about how I organize things, so I'd rather just not have these created and do it myself. Usually using simple folders only, actually. So just so you know, a little background on that setting there. A lot of people don't know what it's about. The good news is, if I still don't like it, again, I can move any object out of the rooted folder, right? Like add to cart. I mentioned moving objects does not hurt anything. So if I move add to cart out, right, you'll see that it actually gets refactored, the path, for that portion that it lost. And so it automatically added that, or tacked on that part that was being inherited at first. So, why not? Let's move all these out. And once I've moved all these safely out of the rooted folder, I can then go and delete it. Do I have to do that? No, but again, I'm a bit picky. So I'd rather have my own folders. Anyway, where I was going with that is add to cart is part of the product page. So let's drag it on up and put it in our simple folder instead. So the product page. Let's continue through these. We have our nav bar. Maybe that gets its own folder, even though it's, theoretically part of the main page. What we can do is create on the main page a subfolder, which we'll call navbar. I'm going to speed this up again. I'll speed it up a bit. I noticed that we're going a little bit more than the timing took when I did this on my own. So where do you go? The home button. Let's drag him into that subfolder of main page called navbar. Same thing with cart. That's part of our navbar. So let's drag him in as well. Here is actually on the cart. So we're checking the price. Let's go ahead and create a simple folder for cart page. highlight the action to get the object, drag it on in. Same thing with the one item. We can consider that part of the cart, I suppose. Drag it in. Checkout, remember, is part of our nav bar. So let's drag it into nav bar. So as you can see, if I did too many actions, this would be a bit more hectic. All right, so don't go too many actions before you come in and organize things like this. Then we get to our actual billing part. Now, luckily, these have pretty good names already, but let's make a folder for them. Add new item, simple folder. This will be our order processing page, for lack of a better word. And I could even drag multiple items. If I know, based on the object name, that all these guys here belong to that particular page, I can multi-select them and drag them all in at once. Those things are starting to get leaner now. We have a 0 item span tag. That was when we checked the cart. Maybe I, make it a little bit more easy to understand. Empty cart, something like that. And that could be part of our cart page. So drag it under the cart. Same thing, order received. Now that's kind of a special one. It could belong to order processing or cart page, in my opinion. So we'll just pick one. And there you have it. So now we have a nice organized repository. So again, I recommend doing this early and often and trying to organize things before they get too hectic. So a quick question that popped in, can folders have spaces? Good question. You might have noticed that I'm making these all one word. You could put spaces in, but it will automatically turn that space into an underscore. So yes and no, I guess is the answer. Good question though. And so this is really the bulk of best practices when it comes to large UIs. You want to organize early and often, as I mentioned. So we talked about both organizing and naming conventions. Both are important. This last topic's a little bit quicker. We're just going to talk about, well, we haven't done it yet, so I can't check it off. We're going to talk about reusability. So you heard me mention that when we, for example, use the nav bar items as opposed to little pop-up links and things like that. Let's show why we did that. Again, for newcomers to Ranorex, a big part of our framework is around reusability. And when we're talking about that, we want to be talking about the test suite view. So at the moment, right, we have a test suite with one test case, open, recording one, and closed. That doesn't really tell us what's happening though. So we want to make sure that we define this recording one, we can split it apart into several reusable modules based on what they do. Right? We can kind of divide up those 30 actions into different distinct parts. Real quick before we do that though, I did see a great question about the cleanup button of the repository. Remember I deleted that, I clicked on a desktop item, I clicked the exit button just to show you that we do automatically get app folders in here. But after I deleted the action, that object still remains. So one thing you never, ever want to do, and I'm glad the question was asked because this is definitely a best practice, I never want to come in here and delete this object directly. Why is that? Well, because this is a global thing, right? This exit button might be used somewhere else. So a safer way of cleaning up objects that are no longer in use is by using this cleanup button we see in the toolbar of the repository. If I click that, it's going to scan my entire solution and look for any objects that may be in my repository that are not being used. And it checks everything, every module, every bit of custom code you've written. So it's very, very safe. So always, if you're going to clean up your repository, don't do it directly. Always utilize that cleanup button. It is a much safer way. I basically am guaranteed now that this exit button is not being used anywhere, so it can go away. Now, if I want to keep it for whatever reason, I can uncheck it here. There's also a search there, but I don't want to keep it, so let's Click OK to delete it. Excellent question, actually. Right, so let's talk about the reusability aspect. I'm going to quickly run through these 30 actions and basically divide them up based on what they do. Okay, so 1 through 3 was all about searching for a product. So I can multi-select those 3 actions, right-click, and I'll see an option here called Move to New Recording Module. Now this is where I want to, you heard me call these modules keywords before. This is where I want to give it a very meaningful module name, such as search item. All right, telling me exactly what those 3 actions inside are going to be doing. Search product, you know, whatever you want. Okay, you can always change these names later, but it's good to have something meaningful. You see this creates a new module. So we have a new file called search item, and those 3 actions were brought over to that new module. Now you could do this another way around. Basically, you could create a module from scratch and certainly just copy paste the appropriate actions in, but this kind of does everything in one, so it's a little bit faster. Here we have the add to cart. Well, even though it's one action, let's go ahead and use it. Probably could have made that part of the search, right? We could have combined them. Could have been search and add. It's totally up to you how you separate these things, but I want to think about reusability, especially when it comes to these 2 actions, for instance, the nav bar stuff. Again, I should be able to access this nav bar from anywhere in my application. So these are perfect examples of, even though they're single actions I want to make a reusable module. So again, even though it's a single action, I'm going to right click it and move it to a new module, you know, we'll call it go to home. Right, and I'll show you why we do this, obviously, here shortly. Same thing with cart. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Go to cart. I can do that anywhere. Right, the nav bar is always up. We're checking the cart, so 2 validations. We'll call it check cart for item, right? Because we also check the cart for no item. So you can be as specific as you need to be for these names. It's better to be more specific than less specific, I would say. Here's checkout. It's another nav bar one. So even though it's a single action, I'm going to go ahead and make it its own module. Luckily, the next big chunk of actions here are all about filling out our order. So I get to choose a lot there and move to new recording module. You know, check out data entry, I guess we'll call it. And last but not least, all I have left in recording 1 after that is 2 validations, which basically check that the order, you know, was received, or we get that message anyway. So I'm going to rename recording 1 as opposed to moving these actions. I'm going to simply rename the file, just like I rename any file. Slow double click to check order received. I before E except after C always gets me. And there we have it. So the reason I did this is reusability. All right, right now we have 1 test case, which test case isn't a great name. Let's make it an add item test case. We're going to keep open, but now we need to start using these modules we split apart to build up our test case flow. So we're going to search item first. You think of this almost like a high level action table on its own. We're going to, where is it? Add to cart. We are going to go to cart. We're going to check the cart for item. We are then going to do our checkout. So go to checkout. check out data entry, and finally, check order received. All right. Good news is I can even make another test case out of these modules I already have. And this is really the key. Normally when you're creating automation, right, it's for regression testing. And so the idea is that if you build these modules up and you make a very conscious effort to make them very reusable like this, again, special tip is using things like nav bars, then I might be able to build a new test case without even having to do any new recording. So let's try it. We can create a new test case in our test suite. I'll simply right click and say add new test case, which we'll call, I don't know, check empty cart by default. All right, we just want to log into our app. So we will use, reuse, I should say, the open browser module. We will go to cart, and then we will take one item. And actually, I'm thinking about it. Instead of check order received, right, where we check both the empty cart and the message order received, let's separate them. So checking for empty cart, I'm going to make it its own thing here. Check empty cart. All right, so again, think about reusability like I didn't just now. Even though it's one action, I want to be able to reuse it again and again. So let's add it to our initial test case as well as our new test case here. These are basically little building blocks I can reuse again and again. And then last but not least, we will close the browser. Close browser. Now I can consider the open browser to be my setup module. Right click it and you'll see move to setup. And I can consider close browser my teardown module. Teardown in particular is important because that means that if any errors happen in the middle of my test process, my flow, it's at least going to make sure to close my browser. So oftentimes you'll put more than just closing in there. It'll be things like logging out, any kind of garbage collection. One thing we want to do, right, is we want to make each test case independent of every other test case. It should be able to run on its own and not rely on any previous test case, right? So that's a really good automation in general best practice. Well, let's run this back. There were a couple things that potentially might have gone wrong with the data that was already in there. It did keep my existing data from a practice run this morning. Shame on me for doing that. But one thing I might be able to do to get around that is by making use of a special property of the open browser action. So kind of glad it happened so I could show you this really kind of hidden in plain sight property here. If you find your open browser action, again, open browsers for web, but you'll also have run application for desktop. Every action has its own set of properties. And one of them is to clear cache and clear cookies. So again, one thing that might be advantageous to do, that way, hopefully no existing values are there. I could have recorded this in incognito mode as well, which probably would have been a better option to not have to go back and change these. You can also see that as well as an option. So check those out. Again, they're kind of hidden in plain sight, the properties of every action. And we'll give it a run. I realize I'm a little over time there, so apologies on the timing. Of course, it always goes faster when you're by yourself, not trying to explain things. So we should see both test cases run. Again, there might be a little hiccup with particularly the submit form. So this might turn into a little bit of a best practice around troubleshooting. Let's see what happens. Remember, I didn't use that little button that popped up right away. Ah, there is a problem with my order here, huh? order received. How did that get in there? Oh, no idea why I put that there. So maybe going too fast. Check the order of your modules. Luckily, it was pretty obvious, right? Let's do a quick manual cleanup of my cart and we'll rerun. And just to be sure, I'll do one quick little glance. Open search, add, go to check for item, go to check. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure how that ended up in there. Fingers faster than my eyes, I guess. I see a question while this is running about the setup and teardown. Yes, just emphasizing the use of setup and teardown, definitely a best practice. Setup, to be honest, is kind of there for show. It doesn't really do anything special, but teardown, as mentioned, kind of has that error behavior that is really important because we want to make sure that even if something goes wrong with our test case, we kind of clean up after ourselves, right? Especially in an app like this where we do actually have pre-existing data and things like that, as we saw, could get in the way. Now here, I'm just worried about the state object. Yep, I had a feeling because I didn't reset that field. Notice down here it says searching for Florida. So it was kind of expecting already this field to be set for Florida. I'm going to help it along here just for the purposes of timing. But ideally, I would re-record that step with that toolbar, that drop down empty. Probably see what I mean by that though. So yeah, pre-existing data, be careful of it. Always make sure you clear cache, clear cookies. You always want to record from a blank slate, and you always want to run back from a blank slate because repeatability is obviously quite important for automation. So just for the giggles, I will quickly show you, what would we do if we got to a point like that where, because it had that pre-existing value in there, right? It's this guy. It was expecting, you could see pretty obvious that the object name itself, that's what kind of teed me off to it, is Florida. So it's looking for that drop down to already be set to Florida. What I would do typically is run my test back to here. So you can always run to a certain point of your test. Right, it'll just run all the actions to that point and then troubleshoot it, re-record perhaps, or you can always do it manually, right? I can open this up manually and get me to that checkout page and basically record that, well, I need something in my cart first, don't I? Basically record that step where I'm clicking that checkout, clicking that drop down as an empty one, right? Like the way it is now. So clear cache, clear cookies is actually quite important for web. So how could I re-record that? Well, simply action 10 here, I want to replace action 11, right click and say record from here. And just, do one little action here to click on that drop down field. Again, wait for that red border. Sometimes it takes a second. Don't speed it. All right. Stop. And notice the difference. Now it's called, and that's a terrible name. We'll call it drop down for state drop down, something like that. And where does it belong? It belongs on the order processing page. So let's drag it on in there. Let's get rid of the original one, which is no good. And since we're deleting it, what do? We follow up anytime you edit actions, actually, for that matter. We follow it up with a cleanup. Oh, the funnest part about doing live webinars is things like this, in my opinion. State dropdown. It looks good now. Okay, so a little bit of a troubleshooting aspect there as well. Hopefully, it's just a bonus for you. And that last topic we covered was focus on reusability. The more UI you have to work with, the bigger your test is going to be, and so the more reusability you want. So you can very quickly build up new test cases and maybe only add a few additional actions or a few additional modules. Let's quickly summarize what we learned today. Again, sorry guys about the timing. It's always interesting when you go live, things happen. But we talked about organizing, naming conventions, and reusability. As mentioned in the beginning, there will be a follow-up email. Any additional questions, we're going to open it up for QA here in a second, but any additional questions you have, do feel free to reply to that. All these best practices and things like that we showed today, there's a lot more. Obviously, we only have time for a couple here in the hour, but we do also offer internal training. So Ranorex has what's called Champions Training. Is a very consultative type approach. So we only meet with your company, your group. Therefore, we basically customize all these best practices to fit with your application, your technology stack. So if these are the kinds of things you're interested in learning more about, definitely either reply to this follow-up email like, hey, you mentioned some additional training. I want to get more information on that. Or certainly you can reach out to me personally. I'll open it up for Q&A, but I want to put my personal information up there at the bottom. You'll see my email, jbranham@ranorex.com. Any questions from the webinar we don't get to, or if you are interested in learning more about some of that internal training we offer, feel free to reach out. But for those who don't have a hard stop, I will open it up to Q&A. And let me peek through. It looks like my colleagues have done a pretty good job about keeping up with some of these questions.
Hi, Jay.
Hey,
there
Josh.
is one marked as a red flag that I think would be great for the group.
All right, let's see. Yes. What's the groups under module browser for? So we have a little section here called groups, and this is for any module groups you create. Basically, module groups, I'll be honest, they're a little bit deprecated at this point because we have things like the smart folder now where you can organize things that way. But basically, you could take any chunk of modules, let's say these three here, and you can right click and you could say group them. The only benefit there really is we get kind of a more what's the word I'm looking for? A leaner looking flow here. So instead of having all these modules, right? If we see that they belong together a little bit, we can group them. So let's say this is going to be search, add, and go, for lack of a better example here. So if I group those, we create what's called a module group. Now, same thing as before. Probably want to give it a better name than just module group, right? So we'll call it search, add, and go. Again, kind of a silly example, but I feel like that's a much better name. Once we save everything, we'll see it update there. So yeah, this is just basically a way that you can kind of make it a little bit leaner. Now be careful with it, right? Because now I can't, now I can no longer, maybe it's very specific to that test case, as opposed to, I kind of duplicated things, if you want to think of it that way. So I still have search item, which I can use on its own. So you can create a huge solution and never have to use a module group, to be honest. But if you really want to make things look a bit leaner here, then have at it, I guess. But other than that, there's no special functionality or really any advantage, I would say, to using those. One thing I guess you could argue, is that it also makes it easier to find particular things. And actually, I'm glad the question was asked, because there's a better way to group modules. If you really want to group things here in this view, just because you don't want this view to get too large, kind of like the repository actually. You can create basically what are simple folders in your project. So here we have solution, we have project. If I right click on that and go to this add menu, you see a new folder option there. So, let's say, for example, we had a solution that is going across web, desktop, and mobile. And I want to really, differentiate the modules from each other. That would be an example of why I would create a folder here in my project, one for web. Let's do one for mobile, even though we don't really have any mobile or desktop modules to work with. You'll get the idea. And then one for desktop. You can do this multiple different ways, right? It could be by individual tester. It could be by team. Again, the flexibility is all there for you. So it really comes down to how you want to do it. And of course, you can also have subfolders in here. So if I have multiple websites and I want to have folders for specific domains, maybe I have an e-commerce folder, for example. I can really do whatever I want here, organization-wise, and then from there, what I can do is drag modules into that folder, and you'll start to see it organizing down here, right? So I recommend this approach over trying to use module groups if you want to group modules together, just to make this view easier to navigate through, because kind of just like the repository, actually, this little module browser view down here can get quite large, obviously, as your project grows. And just like the repository, what does it have? It has a nice, helpful search field here. So if I'm only looking for my e-commerce modules, well, there you have it. I can quickly get to that folder. Let's pretend it was minimized maybe there. There we go. Yeah, actually, great question. That kind of led me down a bit of a tangent, but I think it's so so similar to simple folders in the repository that it's worth a mention. Another great way to organize larger projects. Thanks for the question. That was a good one. Any other interesting ones that you guys picked up on, Josh or Mubin? I'll quickly scan through them here.
That was the best question for the group in general. Quite a few questions we've answered that aren't necessarily related.
Yeah, you guys have done a great job keeping up with those. So let me see if I can pick any interesting ones out. I know we are a little over time, so I appreciate everyone's patience on the timing there. Again, if you have a hard stop, feel free to drop off. There was a good question that came really early on. It was kind of unrelated to the topic here, but nonetheless, since it was the first question out of the box, let's have at it. It was tips for recording a screen with a checkbox selection, and one thing popped in my mind about that with checkboxes. I can kind of make it related actually now that I think about it. What's a good reason for organizing these besides knowing where things live? A good reason for organizing things this way is that recording is just one codeless approach that we offer. Another approach is to actually create what we call smart actions. So I can drag an object up to any action table, in any module, and create an action out of it. And we have your standard, mouse click, swipe, key sequence, all the stuff that's kind of out of the box. But there's actually some interesting actions in here that you can only get this way. You can't get these from recording. And those are these ones kind of in the middle here, like invoke action, get value, and set value. So the checkbox is an interesting question because a good tip would be, let's talk about the difference in here. Let me just pull up somewhere in here. There it is. There's a checkbox. And this is true of desktop, web, or mobile, all the same concept really. First things first, I want to get that object into my repository. And again, there's multiple ways to do that, but recording is pretty straightforward. Just to show a different way though, why not why not use the spy tool for once here? So I'm going to open up our Ranorex spy tool. Capture that object by using the track button. It's the show image checkbox. After tracking it, I'll see it here in spy in this tree view, and I can simply drag it right into my repository. Now again, right away, right, we see that it does belong to a different app, so it automatically got, sorted into a different top level item folder, which is nice. But, just to keep it relevant to what we're talking about, this is my image-based tab, right? So maybe I have it's not just for web. I have a simple folder for image-based tab. Again, kind of a silly example, but this keeps it relevant to the organization topic. Right, so, okay, now what's the tip here? If I record this, or if I record a click on this object, that's gonna check it, right? Today, anyway, right? Because it was automatically, or its default state was unchecked. But this action is just a mouse click, right? It's just clicking it. It's not thinking really about check or uncheck. It just says click it. So you can see that if tomorrow, if I run this item back, and tomorrow, let's say the default state is to already be checked, this mouse click is actually going to do maybe the opposite of what I want. It's going to uncheck it. So we kind of call these clicks a dumb action, if you will, as opposed to a smart action. Now, certainly I could jump into code, right, and do like a little if-else statement that says if it's unchecked, click it. But if it's already checked, don't do anything. But if we can avoid code, we should, right? So what can I do with these smart actions to deal with this? Well, if I take this checkbox up, drag it up, drop it here, rather than do a mouse click, I'm going to look at some of these other actions. Invoke action, for example, shows that we can call the check or uncheck event on this object. So now I'm really forcing a state, right? Instead of just clicking it and hoping for the best, I'm forcing it to be either check or unchecked. We can also do that with the set value action. So there's more than one way to do this, really. I could say checked equals true. Right, so checked equals true. All right, now if I run this, rather than a click, which doesn't really consider the initial state, I'm going to force it to be in the state that I want it to be in. So hopefully that was a good little tangent there for checkboxes in particular. So again, yeah, a lot of the newcomers, you might not know that you could create an action that way. And sometimes you get some interesting options that you can't get from recording. So there you have it. Hopefully that was a good tip. Let's see, any more pop up? No, it looks like most questions were answered. Yeah, we're about 15 over what we said we'd be, so I will let you guys go here in a second. But of course, any questions that pop in your mind, feel free to reply to that follow-up email you'll get, or email me directly. Again, it's jbranham@ranorex. I'll put it in the chat window here maybe real quick to send to everybody. Always happy to get your emails. And me in particular, I do a lot of the internal trainings. So if you'd like to ask more about that and get some customized training on some of these types of best practices, I'm happy to provide more information there. But thanks everyone for your time. I hope you had a good presentation here and learned a little bit, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. I appreciate your time, and hopefully see you guys a bit later. Take care, everyone.